Good morning. Welcome to our monthly IHE Third Thursday Lunch and Learn. And today we have a real treat. We have Cyd Gottlieb, who is a third generation Holocaust survivor. Her grandparents were survivors. And Cyd and I met through Sliding Doors, a program that we're working on through the partnership region. And Cyd came onto it and also then befriended Sarah Cutler. And when Cyd started discussing her grandparents and that she was putting together this presentation and also the uniqueness that she never met her grandparents, I said, would you please be a presenter for us? And so we're privileged to have her today. And if you just give me a minute, Cyd, I will share a screen and we can begin.
Thank you.
And can everybody see now the graphic that says, great, thank you, Jane, for letting us know. And Cyd, please feel free to go ahead and start.
Sure. And I did just zoom out a little bit. Can everyone see the full slide? Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, Scott, for walking me through the Lunch and Learn program. And, and thank you to the community for including me in this fascinating and educational series. I do see Beth, which I have the book from Sarah. So hello, good to meet you. Yeah, so just a few things before I get into everything. Just wanted to let everyone know that I just am recovering from COVID, so I might be coughing or have a little sniffle. Please bear with me. Also, I have a very precocious Chihuahua running around that doesn't like it when his attention, my attention is not on him. So I'm hoping that he'll give us some time and space here. Okay, yeah, hi. So this is my contact info. We can come back to it at the end if you'd like to follow up. Absolutely interested in continuing conversations and, really broadening our community here together. And I'm here to share about how my mother's family has impacted my sense of identity as a third-generation Holocaust survivor, and how this legacy actively contributes to my professional practice as a visual artist and a teaching artist. So much of my studio work considers the concept of home and expands upon notions of displacement. And coming up, I'm putting together a solo show that will be located at the Burkholder Project in Lincoln, Nebraska. So maybe some of you will want to travel and go see at some point in 2025. Details to be determined. And so with that show, I'm looking to dive deeper into my own survival stories while I look to communicate more openly about my family's Holocaust survivor and refugee history. Personally, I hope to emphasize how community resources and peer support are vital for overall mental, physical, and emotional health. And a well-balanced society, regardless of any particular religion or culture, thrives together when people are part of that society, helping one another so that collectively we make it through. So yeah, I guess we can go to the next slide, please. So this is some of my earlier work, and refugee history exists on both sides of my family. And it's important that I publicly embrace my identity to bring context to the artwork that I'm making to provide some transparency about the person behind the work. As you can see, it's very abstract. And it's very detailed as well. So when I first started getting into my art practice, this was the kind of work I was making, where I was very into the twists and turns of everyday life and really analyzing how every tiny bit is connected. I do feel as though it's a very Jewish characteristic to develop innovative and innovative responses to critical issues. Our core values of our culture emphasize collective responsibility, community, education, and an inherent need to constantly question. So my work, I see it as a way to open the doors through the conversation of a visual language that I'm creating. And so, as I'm working in real time with my artwork, I am processing all of these anxieties or fears. And a lot of that came from my upbringing. So next slide, please. And this is just a little bit more of then some work that developed after, just so that you get an idea of where I'm coming from. And my abstract style originally developed in tandem with my recovery from a major spinal cord injury. So at the time I was tapping into psychological and bodily sensations, noting visual patterns, and making potential outcomes for the self. So by following line, shape, form, color, and whatever materials were in front of me, I could give meaning to what was tangible, digest those thoughts and feelings, and understand how to rebuild with a solidified state of mind. You know, in these kinds of works, I'm tracking time, I'm managing pain, I'm finding ways to express what I can't say. Next slide, please. And then that is kind of the last little bit here, what kind of pain on this one piece called pre-shift meeting. So it's important that, you know, both my story and that of my grandparents is this idea of wayfinding when life twists and turns. So today's presentation, like my artwork, centers on what happens when one follows instinct. And what led me to today, as Scott had mentioned, began in 2021 during the digital days of the pandemic. I had freshly kind of crash landed back in Ohio from the East Coast, reconnecting with my family and a Midwestern approach to life. And my mom invited me to accompany her to the online meetings for Sliding Doors, the group for 2Gs. And, you know, I was happy to be that source of support for her. And also it really brought some collective perspective for my own experiences as I started to think about how I needed to tell more of my own narrative, especially because moving forward with my visual work, it's so abstract. People are like, what is this? Well, what this is what I could make before I knew what to say. So let's see here. Also, Scott is from the Detroit area, about an hour north of where I am in Toledo, Ohio, and my father's side of the family came over to Canada and Windsor, and then through Detroit and Toledo. So there's some connection there. If anyone has any more knowledge about, you know, the Bereznica, Poland, Galician communities there, I'm all ears here. So about 3 years ago then, I was able to connect with a 3G living in Cleveland, who you all might know, originally from Omaha, Sarah. And after a couple of email exchanges, we ended up speaking on the phone for 2.5 hours, thanks to Scott's introduction. And the two of us discovered that our conversation was the first time that either of us had connected with a fellow 3G or explored shared experiences with another person similar in age from survivor backgrounds. Thanks to this interaction, I realized that finally it felt like an appropriate time for me to tap into these stories that I had been trying to tell anyone and everyone since grade school. So after that first 3G connection, I knew that I needed to engage in, you know, more of these conversations. There were others out there like me, and they wanted to talk. After that phone call, I found myself interacting with a 3G also who I connected with from a 2G meeting based in Buffalo, New York. And she told me about 3GNY, a group for grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. She shared with me that there was a speaker training course available. And I then through that learned that there was a connection to my home community through a board member of this group. So, you know, more emails and trying to figure out when I was ready, what I needed to do. And in last summer in 2023, I completed the WEDU, We Educate course, which I saw as a better way to learn how to thoughtfully communicate my family's story. So within this entire past year, I have finally grown so much more comfortable to take ownership over this story. And, you know, despite differing viewpoints or different interpretations of our shared history, this 3G community is what I have been looking for throughout my entire life. And just so everyone else is aware, as of recent, these 3G groups They span multiple cities. So there's 3G Philly, 3G New York, 3G Boston, Miami, etc. And it's evolved into a national group called Living Links, which acts as an umbrella for these continuing factions and actively partners with the USC Shoah Foundation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So back to where it began. Me and my mom and me. So growing up in Northwest Ohio, I was the only Jewish girl in my class at a secular school. And often I felt an intense responsibility to represent my religion and culture in a geographical area where many times it seemed as though maybe I was the first or the only person that someone knew to be Jewish. I was that child that made sure to let people know I didn't celebrate Christmas. Very outspoken and precocious and whatnot. But I was also, the angsty kind of quiet teen that felt as though there was always a target on my back, being in Ohio and being in a place where, everyone kind of had blonde hair, blue eyes. And I didn't know how to internalize what I was seeing and absorbing, even if it wasn't maybe, what was actually going on. I learned, I knew through stories that maybe I didn't feel safe, and maybe it was accurate, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But anyway, so in many 3G meetings, we've shared about how we first realized that the Holocaust existed, or that there were victims or survivors in our family. And to be honest, I can't remember a time when I didn't know. Though I do remember that I began to grow very protective of and empathetic towards my mother. It's an interesting experience to view your parent under a new lens. And of course, my mom wanted to teach her children about her family and share her upbringing. So in doing so, she had to be open and honest about why her parents weren't her biological parents and how she came to live with her parents at 2 years old, thanks to our local Jewish Family Services organization. Why couldn't her biological parents care for her? And why wouldn't they fully let her go to these people that she considered to be her family? Next slide, please. So as a young child, I learned of our family's journey through various ghettos, concentration camps, displaced persons camps, and countries from a box of documents kept on the top shelf of a closet. Inside, I found authentic primary documents of different paper types, fonts, chronological stamps, seals, and languages. By following patterns and details, I figured out how to understand what words could not describe. And then in my art practice coming up with this show I'm working on, mimicking this method of discovery, I aim to present combinations of collected materials with drawn and painted applications to create artist books that usher along a sense of play. Ideally, this sort of work can apply to anyone who has found themselves on a nonlinear path. So I'll tell you about the nonlinear path with regard to my family story. And so in these pictures here, my mom is on the bike in the center and the bottom left corner. The top left corner is Eva and Ed Rosenberg, my mom's permanent foster parents. And on the top right is Judith Cohen Frischblatt and Meyer Frischblatt, her biological parents. And there's a picture of Judith with my mom when she was a baby in Toledo, Ohio. So coming up, I am going to more or less show you documents in the same way that I learned about my family. And in doing so, I want to make a note, just going through all of this, compiling all of this information. Most of us with survivor history are still uncovering bits of information and piecing together, whatever parts of our stories that we can find, our family stories. It's not an open and shut book with these kinds of narratives. We're constantly mining, correcting, revising, and working to share a story as accurately as possible. And, sometimes you think that you know what happened, and then another detail comes to light. Maybe you relayed something else in the past, and, in striving to counter Holocaust denial, this is a real challenge. It's very emotional for me, at least, in trying to be accurate and in formulating our own identities. Dog is here. Hello. We're formulating from fragmented bits, translations, vignettes, and retellings. So there's a lot of anxiety, frustration, as I mentioned to Scott, not knowing how to pronounce our own family's names or located the places of origin. I'm looking to honor as accurately as possible, but we also need to acknowledge the very real fear of wanting to present something that there still might be so much more of to learn and discover. So in what I'll show you, some photos are out of order chronologically. As I learned my story, maybe one new paper comes in and throws off the previously established timeline, and we dig as deeply as we can, knowing that some parts are missing. And this also becomes as much of the story as possible, as the parts that we do not, the parts that we don't know as parts that we do know. Next slide, please. So this is Meyer Frischblatt, my mom's biological father, on the right. I believe he's about 17 or so there. And he was from Warsaw, Poland, born January 19th, 1909, the son of Shmuel Frischblatt, who was a craftsman, owner of a suitcase factory, and Sarah Leah Hochberg. Meyer's family was deeply religious and observant and Orthodox family, and I believe that they did live somewhat comfortably. From an early age, I recognized that my life existed because other people happened to have died. In this photo, Meyer is, I believe, the only surviving person who went through the Holocaust. And this is a photo from his maternal grandmother's yahrzeit tombstone headstone unveiling in 1926 when Meyer was 17 in Warsaw. And the writing down on the bottom says all of this, and I assume there's more that I don't know what it says, but it was written by his father Shmuel. And I believe that his mother Tova, Devorah Hochberg, or I'm sorry, his grandmother Tova, Devorah Hochberg, was the daughter of Tzvi Ziv, the Kohen of Shedlitza, south of Lodz. Next slide, please. So Meyer went to business school, worked in his family's business, and he was married. His first wife, pictured here, unfortunately, I do not know her first name, but I do know her last name was Pinkushevich, however you can say that best. And they married in Bialystok on February 6, 1932. And then in 1933, their daughter, Sarah, pictured here, was born. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a fabulous collection of money that somehow Meyer kept and had, which I don't know how, because many of the dates are 1917, 1918. Why I'm including this is to show that a lot of this money doesn't really exist anymore, according to borders at the time. Governments changed their territories, and this was during the time when they lived right in a spot where it went from kind of the Austro-Hungarian Empire to Soviet territory, and Poland and Russia kept kind of changing lines. Some of where my family is from, with Meyer's second wife, is now technically in Ukraine. Basically just wanted to say that the governments changed, and in the middle of these changing borders meant that there were also a lot of languages that were spoken and heard. And I just want to emphasize that Meyer had an ability to pick up languages. So I believe that he worked in the machine business with manufacturing suitcases until 1939, when the factory was ordered to close. Jewish businesses were seized and he could no longer work. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is, according to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's printed volumes. Here is a map of ghettos around the region. Treblinka is highlighted because it is the one death camp that many people of this area were sent to. And this photo is also from that archive, showing just the wall of the Warsaw Ghetto, which is where Meyer and his families lived. And basically, I'm unsure of a lot of the details of when they went into the ghetto and, how everything happened, but I do know that he decided to go and stay in the eastern countryside with a family named Rubenstein in Białystok once tensions escalated in Warsaw. As a family, his wife and Sarah and Meyer decided that Meyer should leave because there was an increase in violence that was targeting Jewish men within the area. And once Jews were made to wear visible identifiers of their Judaism, the Magen David, on their clothes, he knew it was time to leave. So originally he went away on a business trip, and they thought it would be a temporary stay for maybe 5 months or so until conflict passed. Eventually, persecution expanded to new geographical locations, and about 6 months after Meyer left Warsaw, it was determined that anyone coming from German-occupied parts of Poland who were living in the eastern part of Soviet-controlled Poland was ordered to take Russian citizenship. So I do have a note in Meyer's wonderful files that he left around November 23rd, 1939 to Białystok. So as you can see, there is a nice little informal map here, just kind of showing that he went from Warsaw to Białystok, which meant that he changed territories more or less, from Nazi to Soviet. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is Meyer, and Meyer documented. I'm incredibly lucky to have Meyer's firsthand documentation and preserved primary sources. And I wanted to bring this into this point of the presentation to show you, because though we never met, I can hear his voice from recordings, which I'll share a bit later, and I can feel his hand through various testimonies in multiple languages. If you do zoom in, you can see that these 3 papers are more or less the same testimony, but in 3 different languages. And as I understand it, he was a polyglot that spoke 7 or 8 languages. Basically, I'm lucky that he wanted to tell his story. I didn't know him, so if not for these documents and photos, I would have no idea. Some people shut down and couldn't talk about their experiences, but even if accents are thick or translations have yet to occur, details remain unclear. I have these. And this is a person who needed for the world to know what was happening. Even if information, is still somewhat lost through the generations, we can absorb to understand this life lived. So something from one of his tapes, I'm going to just tell a quick story. So in 1940, which, not too far after when he left for Białystok, the Russians knocked on doors to force anybody from German-occupied cities to take Russian citizenship. Meyer refused and proclaimed he was not a communist. On June 15th, 1940, at the age of 31 years old, he was arrested, taken alongside political prisoners, thieves, bandits, and what he called hooligans, and was loaded onto a train of 70 cattle cars, eventually destined for a gulag camp, what I believe to be a concentration camp, a labor camp for single men, located 6,000 miles deep into Russia. Each car stuffed 32 people into a space where there was no room to lay down. There was one hole in the floor for bathroom needs, and each car was given one pail of water a day, plus maybe some fish or half a slice of bread. When people could no longer withstand poor conditions and passed away, their dead bodies were thrown from the trains, as there was no time to stop along their journey. The entire trip lasted 4 weeks. And after some time confined to what I believe was a church, in 1941, he began a 5-year sentence without trial of hard labor. When Meyer was arrested with political dissenters, the Russian Commandant military police stripped and searched all of their intended incoming prisoners, and everyone's belongings were taken away. In the process of all of this, Meyer took a pocket watch and hid it in a sock and kept that sock in his shoe. The soldiers didn't notice. So, after a couple of months of existing on thin oatmeal and water, no coffee, no tea, he was hungry and learned that someone nearby had bread. So he decided to sell his watch. Meyer went to the person who was working as a barber where the Russian soldiers would go to get their haircuts. So Meyer asked, "Can you find out who wants to buy a watch?" A couple of weeks later, the door opened, a soldier entered the barracks and mentioned Meyer's name. The soldier approached his bed and said, "You, Frischblatt, take your belongings and come with me." So he took Meyer to the commandant quarters at 7 o'clock in the evening and said, "Listen, you had a watch. Give me the watch." In this moment, Meyer says nothing and takes his bag and turns it over, emptying out the items that he has, his shirt, his shoes, and out comes the watch. The commander took it away and ordered him back to the barracks. At that time, the Russians did not exterminate prisoners, but inmates were tortured and worked until they died. After some more months went on, Meyer's weight was maybe 80 or 90 pounds, and he was still sick, tired, and very hungry. So while in the workyard, he saw a soldier standing with a gun, watching him, all of them. So Meyer was so desperate that he walked up to the soldier, opened up his button-down shirt, and said, "Shoot me. I cannot work anymore. Shoot me." And the soldier said, "Oh, no, we need you to work." So though through primitive work every day, people were dying, but they would not shoot him, and he was so desperate. Next slide, please. So as it turns out, Meyer actually kept other things in his shoe. For his entire 5-year sentence in that Soviet camp, which he earned without ever seeing a judge, we believe that he kept a photo of his 6-year-old daughter, Sarah, in his boot on the left, crumpled up and somewhat taped together, maybe. So we still have this photograph today. Meyer later learned that she died in the crematoriums of Treblinka, but we believe that his love for her and the hope that she was still alive kept him going. And I think of her often. Again, another iteration as I was growing up that people died, and if they hadn't died, I would not be here. So in 1946, Meyer received the right to return to Poland, traveling to the neighborhood community of Praga, where it seemed as though most of the Polish Jewish community went to look for lost relatives. Meyer was informed in the evidence office that about 90% of his family, about 80 people that he knew, including his wife and daughter, were taken to Treblinka and killed because they were Jewish. Next slide, please. So here is Judith Cohen, my mom's biological mom. And Judith was also looking. She and Meyer met in that neighborhood of Praga in Warsaw. And Judith, here's Doug. So Judith is from, gonna try to say this, Zotov. Looks like Zlachau, but I know it's not. And so a small village that is now outside of Lviv, Ukraine. So she flees, and counter to what Meyer did, she moved east. And she was born in 1918. So around World War II, she was about 20, early 20s. We believe that she was about 22 around the time when she posed as a Russian Catholic girl with forged papers. And she hid in a convent working in the kitchen. So from what we know from Meyer, on some tapes that we have, she was mumbling Yiddish in her sleep and thrown out of the convent. As a young girl, a young woman, she's sleeping between tombstones in a cemetery. And one night she goes out looking for food. A woman discovers Judith, calls the Germans to take her away. And then she ends up going to Bergen-Belsen. And it's only because of her false identity that she goes to Bergen-Belsen, which was at that time, it wasn't an extermination camp. It was seen as an elite camp for wealthy people and non-Jews. So again, living in these kind of borderlands, we assume she spoke Russian fluently and could mask as a Russian girl, not a Jewish girl. And so from what we know, she was likely there from 1940 to 1945 in Bergen-Belsen, which is an extremely long time to be in really unsanitary conditions. So that would put her at around ages 22 to 27. Again, people with good passports were sent there. Due to a potentially forged surname with her false papers, there was no record of her under Jewish authority groups once she was released. She basically struggled to receive restitution because of that. And she was sent to recover in hospital in Sweden from typhus. From what we know, she never cracked. She kept her forged identity even after liberation while in hospital in Sweden. Let's see, I think maybe the next slide shows this. Yes, okay, thank you. So here are some letters that we have, basically saying that she was registered in Sweden, but they cannot find her registration. They don't know who she is. They don't know which language she speaks. They basically need to know what identity did she use. And then on the right is a letter from the United Restitution Organization. This is dated in 1955. So, once she's settled in Toledo, Ohio, and basically says that they want her to appeal to explain that she was sent to forced labor as a Russian girl and not as a Jewish girl. But she needs to explain that her life was in danger. And because of that, she changed, her identity. But she needed to detail how dangerous it was to live as a Jew at that time. From what I know, she eventually did receive some restitution. But again, I don't believe it was much. So Judith was liberated and went to Poland to look for family. And from what we know, she only had one brother survive who moved to Israel. And my mother only met her cousin once. So let's see here. Next slide, please. Thank you. So next, so many slides are basically just documentation that I have about Meyer and Judith's journey together. They met in Poland. Both of them found out that neither of them had family left. So they banded together. Meyer was grieving his wife and daughter, and Judith, we do have some knowledge that she possibly had delusions and some mental instability happening. So Meyer, being the very kind of straight and narrow sort of guy, I imagine that he was a good sense of stability for her. So they decided that they wanted to get married. And in 1946, they married. From what I hear, they hopped around different countries together, kind of just on the run for, a year or two, and then decided they were tired. They didn't have resources. Anti-Semitism was still obviously very rampant. So they decided that they would enter a displaced persons camp together. And because of Meyer's knowledge of languages, he was able to actually work on behalf of the US Army and worked for the United Nations and worked in their administration. So here is a paper saying that he was in the US zone and that he basically left that job with them to go in to work for a DP camp. And then the International Refugee Organization paperwork on the right describes their displaced persons identity card numbers and that they're registered in a camp outside of what I believe is Munich. So Ulm Danube or Donau camp, which was their first of, I believe, 3 DP camps together. Let's see here. I think next slide, please. Thank you. So Judith was DP identity number 600982, and Meyer was DP identity number 600826. While we're talking about numbers, I want to mention that I did hear from my mom that Judith did have a number from Bergen-Belsen, but she never saw it. My mom never saw her number, maybe only once when she was rolling up a sleeve. And what's interesting is that on these DP camp cards, there is a spot that says, are there any identifying marks? And on Judith's, it says none. However, later for her naturalization papers with the US, it says she has a scar. And so, again, kind of tough with the names here about the camps. Lots of German languages here that I don't necessarily know how to pronounce. But it is, but so Meyer was working at this camp, the Ulm camp, as an administrative assistant in the US zone. His position was terminated in 1947 due to a reduction in force, as described with the previous document on the last slide. And then he worked in the US Army in the Area Supply Division. So he was able to work in the office. His knowledge of languages basically gave them the ability to receive good rations, to have preference when they needed to move and change camps. And he was able to take Judith with him every step of the way. Next slide, please. So here is Meyer's information. And on the left is something that as a kid I found really interesting. There is one on the next slide as well for Judith, but basically these are testimonies saying, I am who I say I am. I was born here. I knew this person, so-and-so can say, I knew this person from their birthday party. And, all of these kinds of ways that just emphasizing this need to prove who you are and not deceive people and, kind of combat all of those tropes and stereotypes that I think people, would see Jewish people, playing into perhaps. So, growing up as a kid, I for some reason, I just always came back to this kind of paperwork. And it just always made me strive to spell everything right and to have all of my evidence backed up in papers and not plagiarize and not, everything had to be just perfect because I was so terrified that if something was wrong everything could be taken away or something could happen to me. And next slide is Judith's, if you don't mind. And so right here, you can see identifying marks, none. But she did have a number from Bergen-Belsen. And then the next slide, please. It's me, thank you. So this shows Meyer's employment in the Area Supply Division. And in November of 1950, he went from being a supply officer at DP Camp Landsberg to a secretarial interpreter at DP Camp Leckfield. So basically language was his survival skill. Sorry, that's dog. I'll see though, you're okay. Okay. So with this position that Meyer had, he could apply for a landing permit with the Federation of Australian Jewish Welfare Societies. In 1950, November 1950, he received the permit, which was forwarded to the American Joint Distribution Committee in Munich. And in April of 1951, it was reported that Meyer and Judith ended up leaving for the United States and the landing permit for Australia was canceled. I believe that they entered the US through Ellis Island, and it was likely that this was due to Meyer's employment history with the US forces, that he finally could get that paperwork because of his job. Next slide, please. And so then these are just some other papers that I have from the other DP camps. Every time they transferred, they had to have, documentation saying so, a seal, a signature, a stamp. And these were the kinds of things that, I saw in this box as a kid, and there was no order to it. They were just in a box. So I'd take things out and I'd sort them and I'd say, this one looks like this one. Maybe the numbers are, different. I'd try to organize them according to date. Honestly, I was probably about 8 years old when I started looking at these papers, and I just knew it was always like a special time, and my mom would get the box down from the closet, put it on the floor, and tell me to be very careful and touch gently. And these were very delicate items. And though I didn't know my grandparents, this is really how I felt as though I knew them, was I was being so careful with their lives and learning, asking my mom to tell me each time, what this was. And to be honest, she didn't really know. I kind of became the person who figured it out and would piece it together and tell her something. And she'd be like, oh yeah, well, I guess that makes sense because of something that maybe Meyer said. And then the top left is just documentation that Judith did have an abortion, which it was a miscarriage, but the terminology was abortion. And so in April 1949, she had a miscarriage, likely due to still being malnourished and nervous exhaustion. From what I can tell, between Sweden and all the DB camps, Judith really had a tough time getting her health back. And that did carry on as well when she was pregnant with my mom, actually able to carry her child. But, you can imagine what Meyer must have felt having lost a daughter, having Judith have a miscarriage, and then finally, my mom's born, and we'll get to that. But so these forms are just the transfers between some camps. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here is life in the US, new life. You can see that they've got their weight back. They, are very serious and probably having a tough time acclimating, but they did land in the US in 1951. My mom was born in 1952. And they basically were placed in Toledo, Ohio. At the time, it was the Hebrew Immigration Society, which developed into HIAS now, where they basically just assessed different cities in the United States and figured, who has the capability to resettle refugees? What kind of social systems are there? What can the economics, the economy bring for them? And what kind of Jewish organizations are there to help these people who, didn't speak English and didn't have anything with them other than some papers, which now thankfully I have. So up on the top is Meyer in his uniform with his US Army buddies. From what I heard, he was just ecstatic to have an automobile, a television, and I think at one point he was also talking about having air conditioning, which was huge. Much later, but still. So it was these things that just felt like luxury. Mind you, he was in the hot heat and the brutal winters in Russia, and really didn't have much more than what he was wearing. So, and then with Judith, I don't know too much, honestly, about her. My mom said that she remembers Judith singing, but not speaking. And, like with everything in Nazi concentration camps, she had her head shaved, she had a tattoo number, all these things, but, slowly now she has a wardrobe, she has her figure coming back, she has a child. Next slide, please. So in the middle here is Meyer, my mom, and Judith. Judith was naturalized, and so was Meyer. I only have Judith's naturalization certificate, but she was naturalized on August 30th, 1956 at the age of 38. Meyer was almost a decade older than Judith. My mom was born in 1952. So, Judith was a little bit older for pregnancy, but, Meyer was an older dad, but, they had lost everyone and they had this child, and it was a miracle. However, they couldn't care for her. And, that's something that, from what I hear, there was a lot going on with Jewish Family Services at the time, also worked as an adoption agency and family placement. They don't do that as much anymore, but at the time they were taking in refugees, and their family situations were just so, different across the board. And so there was a selection of children that were more or less available to the Jewish community to care for, because their parents were not able to, due to mental trauma or just whatever else they were dealing with. Judith came down with Parkinson's within 6 months of my mom's birth, which was very early and kind of a mystery, but we knew that she had nervous issues, some mental delusions in the past, even before going through a Nazi concentration camp. So, she was a very vulnerable and fragile woman. As you can see in this photo here, she kind of just has that deadpan face. She was smiling, even in, somewhat of a smile in those previous photos, but here she really looks gone to me. And so, again, Meyer is losing a wife or a child, and, so he didn't want to legally give up my mom. My mom, Beverly Frischblatt Rosenberg Gottlieb, was, his only thing he had really of family. So back to the Rosenbergs, Eva, who is down at the bottom, the top right, she's much older, but she's looking, with admiration at her fellow women, Jewish women. I can't remember the name of the group they were in, but, she was definitely in a sisterhood. And the top right photo on the left is Ed Rosenberg. And he was an inventor. He came from a very, very poor family from the Austria kind of area, I believe. His given name was Adolf, but he changed that. So he went by Edward. And he grew up very, very poor. And Eva Mendelsohn Rosenberg grew up wealthy in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And they somehow met. They fell in love. They were both college educated, which is, wild for both of them having been born in the 1800s. They were in their 50s when my mom came to live with them. And Eva was volunteering at Jewish Family Services and was in charge of helping to place these children. And she was, what I imagine is running a slideshow. And she saw my mom's picture and said, I want that little girl. They never had children. They were going to have Bev. So my mom went back and forth between this struggling immigrant family that could barely speak English, which, by the way, Eva was a teacher and she taught Meyer and Judith English. Ed owned a factory. He actually was an inventor. He had patents for vacuum cleaners. And he ended up giving Judith a job in his factory when her health started to go. So, they were really not just taking in my mom, but they were taking in the family. And so my mom would say that she remembered, well, first of all, she lived with two other families in foster care until the Rosenbergs took her in. She was 26 months. And my mom said that she has this memory, whether it's accurate or not, she has this memory that the first time she went to visit them, she saw a large crystal chandelier hanging in the entryway that seemed to have transported her into a different world. She reflects that it was so bright and so beautiful, and the TV was in color. So, they had an arrangement, they had an agreement that, they would co-raise my mom. And so she would go back and forth, this beautiful, nice suburban home to this inner city kind of duplex. And Judith would work for Ed, and Eva would teach them English, and they would share this little girl. Next slide, please. So here's my mom with Meyer across the years here. Meyer lived in an inner city simple duplex on the top floor, and the apartment was furnished by donations. He had a black and white TV, not color. And my mom remembers Meyer's homemade chicken noodle soup with homemade noodles. She can envision his colander that he used. They shared Tuesday night dinners together. And, you might wonder, why is there so much about Meyer here? Meyer's here at my mom's 6th birthday party, which was at Eva and Ed's house, celebrating with her. He had a job at White Hut, making hamburger patties, probably not kosher. So he came from just a totally different world, and he was making it work. And then these notes down here,
Cyd has frozen, so please hold on a second while we get her back. Am I coming across? Can you guys hear me? Okay. Excuse us for the technical difficulty. Hopefully she'll be back in a second.
Thank you.
Okay, she is, I think, signing back in, so please hold on one second. Give me 1 second. Sorry about this. You're on mute. If you take yourself off mute, Sid. Sid, you're on mute. You're frozen again.
I am so sorry. I don't know what happened, but it looks as though my internet just maybe went out. Maybe it was on me. So I'm sorry about that.
Glad you're back. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. I swear we're almost done. I know it's been a long time. Thank you for your patience here. So and dog is crying. I'm so sorry. Okay, so anyway, really quickly though, just wanted to say that this Drake's Crispy Fry Mix here, Meyer was trying to compile a Yiddish dictionary because he needed everybody to know that there was this language that he could speak. He was thinking in multiple languages all of the time while he was at this very introductory kind of entry-level job. And I'm sure his mind was just racing all of the time. So if anybody feels like they want to take a stab at any of his chicken scratch notes, feel free to let me know. I believe that now people have Yiddish dictionaries, so you know he was trying in good faith there. But yeah, so basically all of that is to show that his mind was constantly moving, working, even when he was limited. And I was actually going to just then play that audio spot I was mentioning to Scott, but now I don't know if my computer will do it because I'm on my phone here. Let's try. Maybe I can just play it and you all can hear.
Go ahead and try.
What did you say? Doesn't hurt to try?
Yeah, let me just put you, let me go back to sharing, getting you to be co-host, excuse me. I'm gonna go off shared. Is that okay, or do you have any more slides that you wanted to show here?
I have 3 slides after this
Okay, so
to wrap things up. But I think I can just play it through my phone because I'm on my phone right here. So if you bear with me, we'll try to get it going. So so talking about Meyer's life here, my mom lived with Meyer from time to time, but not Judith, because when my mom was 9 years old, Judith committed suicide. And you know, this is tough to talk about when I'm talking to people who aren't in the community. I don't really know how to bring it up, but from what we know, you know, she was hearing things, possibly schizophrenic. She was having night terrors. She was really just not settling well after her camp experience, even after, you know, years after through the DP camps, years after the, you know, after the DP camps themselves. So yeah, let's see what I have here in a note. But so basically she when my mom was not with them, when she was with the Rosenbergs, one night Meyer was home and Judith went up to the top floor. I believe they lived on the top floor, so I believe they had an attic, and she soaked rags and newspaper in gasoline and so set herself on fire. So my mom did not know this. She knew Judith died. She didn't know how Judith died until she was more or less an adult. And Eva and Ed were, again, you know, in their 50s when they brought my mom into their home. So they died early when my mom was 18 and 21, I believe. So really, once they passed, that's when kind of, you know, Meyer had passed last out of all four of them. But, you know, she really just kind of got all of this information once she was an adult. But she does remember going to the Orthodox funeral, sitting in a little room with some audio piped through, and of course, you know, the controversies of suicide in Jewish law and tattoos with burials, and you know, so there's a lot there. But so, you know, Meyer made sure to keep my mom in his life, and you know, she desperately wanted to change her name to Rosenberg, and when she was 18, she did that. But you know, she didn't want to offend Meyer. You know, they had a lot of back and forth when she was growing up. She wanted to be American. She wanted to be with her parents. She called even Ed her parents, and of course Meyer would be offended. How many people did he lose? So here is just a clip. When my mom was 14, she helped my grandfather Meyer with a radio spot where he was asked what his views were about the docudrama Holocaust. And apparently he said it was accurate. I have yet to see it. But he, in 1966, he was interviewed under a pseudonym. He was called Martin Fisher instead of Meyer Frischblatt. And, you know, basically, when asked if he ever wonders why he is one of the few survivors, his only answer was accidents, miracles. And that's how he survived. So here's a little radio spot about that, where he basically just explains what it was like to be in a Russian camp.
The Nazis killed his family.
Can you hear that okay? Okay, so the Nazis killed his family.
The Russians nearly killed him. And because of their present policy toward the Jewish people, Martin Fisher is as bitter toward the Russians as he is toward the Nazis.
The Nazis is bandits, and the Russians is not better. They go in the same way now, but Hitler is still over there in Russia. Is one-party system, and they don't let out the Jewish people. The Russians kill you in a cold war, and the Germans kill you in a hot war.
Mr. Fisher calls the Russia of today our modern Holocaust, and the weight of evidence is growing on his side. Columnist William Sapphire recently reported that the CIA has photographed and documented the presence of huge slave labor camps throughout the Soviet Union. For WCWA News, I'm Jane Perry.
So I just wanted to play that spot, one, to show you how even years later, a decade or so, you know, almost 15 years living in the United States, his English was still very challenging to understand. And that he said the Russians and the Nazis were equally bad. Russians killed you with cold, Germans killed you with hot. One wasn't better than the other. And just adding that point, because I think the recognition of the Gulag situation is sometimes downplayed in these survival groups, but you know, it's really just you know, as bad. Granted, they weren't extermination camps, but you know, again, 95% of his family, they were killed regardless. So I can go to the next slide here. Thank you. And so I just wanted to show you my mom, because she lived a full life. And, you know, I can't imagine just everything that she must have gone through as a kid. But she got married, she had 2 children, my brother and I, which is, you know, the only thing she ever wanted was to have her own children. And she actually had to have surgery to do so, possibly because of a congenital issue due to Judith's health. And, you know, that's another conversation. Me having had spinal surgery, you know, I really think that there are generational health issues that we need to talk about and we need to discover a little bit. And if anyone, you know, wants to go into that, I'm glad to talk about that. But, you know, my mom, she's 72 coming up now, and in November she'll be 72, and she loves playing piano. You know, she was an only child. You know, she is a quiet person, introverted, but has this devilish sense of humor when you get her in a wacky mood. And so from her, I learned so much. You know, she made it a priority to help refugees herself. She became president of JFS, the same Toledo's JFS that helped her family resettle. And she helped to resettle Soviet refugees in the early 90s. And I do remember growing up with Azerbaijani women. One of my first words was Russian. And, you know, just being in that space again, how do you help people start over and rebuild a life? And, you know, now in where I'm at now, you know, I went through an apartment fire. I lost everything in my early 20s, you know, ran out with only my cell phone and the right pair of shoes that I chose. And I had to start over. I had donations, you know, I keep thinking about these, you know, this like motif in life and, you know, what's important, what do people need? And community is there. Community came together for them, for her, for me. And, you know, moving forward, that's where I've gone with my life. Next slide, please. 2 more slides, I swear, we're almost done. Thanks for your time. So, you know, Meyer and Judith, their lives stopped short with, you know, basically living their 20s, 30s, and 40s in this chaos of resettlement. I was so lucky to have been able to go out of state. I went to Boston University for school. My dad's dad, who also came over from Poland, he got his GED at 78 years old, and his priority was to make sure his grandkids went to school. So thanks to him and also financial aid and loans, I got a nice degree, and I ended up studying Hispanic language and literature because I understood that the immigration issues of the time were focused on Latin American people coming through, escaping persecution, and I wanted to pay it forward, use language, and help the best I could in the same way that, you know, language opened doors for my family. So that was what I figured I should do. That being said, I wanted to go to art school and I didn't. So then I ended up now, I am a working artist and I am a teaching artist. So the top right, I have been teaching for the last 3 summers now at a mental health community center for adults. Some have homes, some don't. Everyone has a mental diagnosis in order to be there. And the focus is on peer support. So of course, I think of Judith and I think about, you know, all of the resources that JFS offered and how can I do something similar? And then, you know, I found merit in that. And I've gone to an artist residency, I've had gallery shows, I've received grants. And, you know, it feels wonderful to be able to use my artwork as a model of a coping strategy for people. I've also worked with an alternative program to youth incarceration, where it's a day program. So kids, you know, can make art and enjoy activities rather than wait for sentencing in jail. And, you know, again, I think about jail, the camps, you know, a life that is maybe trying to live in some way and is stopped short for some reason. Let's see, what else? I have all these other notes I'm skipping past. But yeah, so, one other thing I did want to just say about BU. I was so lucky my final semester, senior year, I was in Professor Elie Wiesel's final class for literature of memory. Thanks. Sorry, I can't see all the comments yet because of my phone rather than my computer, but thanks for the art comment. But so I had a class with Professor Wiesel, and it was the most challenging emotional situation I'd found myself in. I felt this need to hear from a survivor because I did not know my grandparents, and I you know, put all these expectations on him to give me all these answers. And we were so fortunate, we had to have one-on-one meetings in this class. And on our meeting, you know, I was, I think, the only descendant of survivors in the class. And we talked about it. The final class, he showed us his number. You know, he said, look at this, remember this, because there will not be this to see, you know, moving forward. We will be gone. And so in our meeting, you know, I cried, of course, I bawled, and I just, you know, was like, I never met my grandparents. I just really wanted to hear more about maybe what they experienced or something similar, and try to get to know, you know, more of that from you. And he just made sure that I knew that everyone's experiences were their own experiences. Every situation throughout the Holocaust was different, and you cannot speak for the dead. And so moving forward, I do integrate my family's history in my teaching as a way to say, you know, you can follow these different bits here and there and create your own picture in front of you, you know, but of course, everyone's picture is going to be different, and every pathway is different. Things blend and merge in different ways, different color palettes. And so I really took that message from him where he said, you cannot speak for the dead. You can only speak for your interpretations of how you've learned from them and what you've absorbed from them, but their experiences are their own, and to let the dead rest. So, you know, from there, I kind of want to close things up. I'll be integrating my work, my philosophies into this new exhibition in Lincoln next year, and hopefully speaking more about this and sharing with different organizations. I'll be teaching some art for Sunday school coming up. I'm still involved in 3G groups and working on some offering conversations to B'nai Mitzvah students and people who want insight on, you know, the Holocaust aspect of our culture, and just, you know, trying to move forward the best I can and make it through this world. And thanks for listening to this, you know, the twists and turns. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Cyd. That was incredible. Thank you for opening up. I know it isn't easy, very insightful. I have two quick things. One is, have you read the book about Wiesel's classes called, I think it's called Witness? It's a fabulous book. I'll send you the information. The other is, we'd love it. I'd love it. Our organization, our community, when you do come, your exhibit opens, we'd love to host you for an evening here and let you meet people and again, share your story. We can talk further what that means, but you can't just come, you just can't come to Nebraska and not come see us. But we'd love to have you. I want to thank you. We have time. If there's anybody who has a quick question, please take yourself off mute. That would be absolutely fine. Let me just put it on gallery so I can see.
And thanks for sticking with me. I know this was a long one. I appreciate it.
You know what? It's fun. Like I told you, everybody's is different. I love how you weave back in and out of things. I think it's perfect. It's wonderful. You know, 3Gs is just so important. Steve Weiss had a question about. I gotta see what it is because I can't walk and chew gum at the same time, so I gotta bring up the.
I see this note about the crematorium.
How did all
you.
these photographs and documents survive? I mean, the box. How did you come into it now?
I truly do not know. I have no idea. I just know that we had the box. You know, from what I can imagine, Meyer being a secretary and an interpreter, he just kept paperwork. They, from what I think, came over on a boat. He probably just had, his suitcase and somehow not damaged. I do believe it was his intention to have a Holocaust museum take them at some point in time. But I don't know what came from that. I think he wrote to a few people, but he did pass away. And so all I know is that he wanted the story shared. But also I do see that point of correction. Corpses at Treblinka were burned on open pyres. There was not a crematoria. Again, things that I don't know. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Cyd. I think I want to encourage you with that box to make sure that you get it stored proper, that you get the proper types of envelopes and things so that you can continue to use it and that it's used further from there.
I did just purchase a fireproof container. It's not necessarily a safe because I couldn't afford one that was big enough, but a fireproof container and some sleeves and archival boxes. So
good. Yeah, I'd encourage you too that when you touch them now to use gloves, so don't break it down. But it's wonderful you have. It really is. It's just amazing. You can put it all together. Thank you, Cyd, and I'm honored that we could be the first of your places, the first of many to come to keep the memory alive and to keep the story alive.
Yeah, thank you all for staying with me and for supporting me in this. It definitely has been challenging, and it just feels so good to have done this. I really appreciate your attendance and audience, and also, of course, the invitation, for sponsoring me to do this. So thank you.
Again, thank you, and I look forward to having you here in person.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope to meet all of you as well. Feel free to stay in contact. Scott has all of my info on that first slide as well, if you didn't note it down. But yeah, community is everything. So thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. Next month, we're going to talk about DNA testing and with Dr. Dina Newman. She's actually a former, she used to work for me when I lived in Virginia, and I think you'll find the work she's doing very, very interesting. So thank you all for being here. And Cyd, again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all.